What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another video. Today we're going to be talking about the AMCAS application for medical schools. So we're going to stray away from the MCAT and the whole test and kind of talk about more the application side of the process. Now, AMCAS is pretty much just the company, the website, the platform, etc. that you have to use when you're applying for med school, specifically on your primary application. So what happens is you send your primaries out to a bunch of different schools, and these schools, depending on whether they have some kind of criteria to evaluate you or not, when they're sending out their secondaries, they'll send you out a second application specifically for that school. So this is for the primary, the AMCAS application. I'm just going to talk about what you have to do, what you shouldn't do, anything that I learned, that I tried to avoid, that I learned from my own mistakes. Again, if you're new to the channel, my name is Jay. I'm a fourth year in my undergrad. I've been accepted to the University of Virginia School of Medicine. I'll be starting in August. Excited for that. But yeah, let's go ahead and get into it. So the first thing that I want to get into, when you're doing your AMCAS application, do start early. You wanna, if there's one thing you're gonna get out of this video, start your application early. That's one thing that I should have done better. But the earlier you do your application, not only do you have more time for your MCAT and to study for that, but the earlier you submit your application, and that's huge for these medical schools. Because unlike some of the other, some of the other things, like even like for colleges when you're taking your SAT, this whole AMCAS application and just applying for med schools, it's a rolling process. So it's a rolling acceptance. So the first one in is the first one that's seen. And pretty much the earlier you are submitting your application, the better chance you have of getting into that school. Me personally, I took my MCAT on August 18th, and I didn't have my application done. So after my MCAT, finished my application, I think I submitted my primary. It was on September 29th, which is pretty close to that deadline on October 15th, I believe, somewhere around there. So I put in my application a little bit late. Fortunately, it still worked out for me, but who knows? What my acceptances would have been if I had done it a little bit earlier. But yeah. So definitely start early. Number two, don't spend too much time making excuses. And what I mean by that, this isn't like some life tip I'm giving you. On the application itself, when you're writing, when you're typing up your experiences, your personal statement, whatever it be, don't sit there and talk about, oh, I got a B on this specific class. I was going through this thing and my grandma had, a rash on her back. I had to tend to her knees, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Don't just sit there and kind of dwell on that for too long. What the application wants you to do, or what you should be doing, rather, is highlight your strengths. So whatever strength you have, whether it be your experience, your research, your science grades, whatever it be, talk about that. So focus on that and kind of downplay your weaknesses. So if you had a B in a specific class, don't sit there and dwell on that too much. Nobody wants to sit there and read about why you got a B when you could be sitting here talking about why you got A's on all your other orgo sections, or how much research you did, or any of that. Number three, definitely when you're making your application, make it personal. All right, you want your application to be as personal to you and as specific to you as you possibly can make it. This is really important because say you're taking the MCAT and you get like a 517 on your MCAT, and you've had blah 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 GPA, and you're super happy, and you apply for the med schools, and you're like, oh my god, I'm gonna get in. My application isn't really that big. They're just gonna look at my numbers. Well, when you're applying to, say, I don't know, Georgetown Medical School, when you send in your application, you're 517 and you're et cetera, something GPA, there's 200, 250 other kids with that same GPA and at least that same score on the MCAT. So what's going to set you apart? What are they looking at that makes you different than the other students? They're looking at your application. So when they're looking at your application, they don't want to see something that's kind of just cookie cutter and, I did all the things and I played it safe and I kind of just, went through the motions. They want it to be, they wanted to translate who you are as a person, as an individual, and they want to see your character kind of through that application. So you have to try your best at kind of, telling your story. Who am I? Why am I different? Why am I better? So yeah, that's really important to make sure you do that. Number 4, don't sound cocky on your application. Okay, I mean this application, of course, you're supposed to talk about why you're good, why you're better than other people, why you're different than other people, but you have to focus on how can I do that without explicitly saying so. Okay, you don't want someone reading your application and you're sitting there actually writing down the reason I'm different than other people, because they don't want to hear that. You just sound cocky at that point. You want to be humble about it. Okay, so like I'll give you a specific example. When you're talking about your experience, say you did research with Dr. Poopface, and you did research on I don't know, some pulmonary some pulmonary research you did with Dr. Poopface. Instead of being like, this was a great experience for me, and I learned a lot about research, and I'm going to take this everywhere, which you should talk about that. Kind of spend a sentence or two talking about, I worked with Dr. Poopface and his team, and they're a great team, and I love him, and he was a great mentor, and he taught me a lot about what I should be doing, and I look up to him and his team, and I liked working with the team. So when you say that, not only are you portraying what you did in the research and what you learned in the research, but you're also kind of telling the schools, okay, like I respect the people I work with. I don't think I'm some like God sent from the heavens that just knows everything. There's people that teach me things, and I respect that. And it kind of humbles you while still, kind of telling them what happened in these experiences that you did. So yeah, number 5, right? Number 5. Definitely do cast a wide net. Now, this is something that most people already know that they have to do. When you're applying for med schools, you definitely should have, a few reach schools, a few schools that you're just kind of realistically expecting to get into, and then a few settled schools. I applied to exactly, I think it was 13 schools. So that's a pretty high number. I know people who've applied to like 21, 22. I know someone that applied to one medical school and got into that medical school. But, I think it's much better if you apply to a bunch of different schools and make them so that they're different. So you don't want to be the guy that just applies to Harvard and, Yale and all these like super tough to get into medical schools. You want to have those schools. You want to have the schools in the middle. You want to have the schools that you're kind of settling for. Because the application process, as you will soon come to find out, is very arbitrary. There will be people that get into Harvard that don't get into some very low tier school. I'm sorry, because that's just the way it works. Some schools look for specific things. It's all their decision. So you never know based on your score, your GPA, and your application if you're gonna get in. You can't have any expectations. You have to cast a wide net and see what you get, and just kind of work with that. Okay, so number 6. Yeah, number 6. Last but not least, do not, when you're doing the application, you repeat information. All right, nobody wants to sit there and waste their time when they're reading your application. And, when you're sitting there and you state something in the experience section on the AMCAS application about something that you did in your, hospital volunteering, and then you just extensively talk about that again on your personal statement, that's kind of a waste of time. And not only are you wasting their time, but you kind of give off the hint that you're not really paying attention to your own application. So the more you kind of, pretty much you have to focus on every part of your application being completely novel. Everything has to be new. When someone reads a sentence, it shouldn't be like, okay, I already know this about you. Everything has to portray a fact about you that they don't know. So in your personal statement, of course you can mention your experience in your personal statement briefly, but don't say the exact same thing that you said in a different section. You don't want to repeat all that information because that just does not look good. Yeah, but that's all I got for you guys. I'm going to go more specifically into the personal statement because that's a huge part of your application. I think the thing that the schools are looking most at when they're reading your application is the personal statement. When I got my interview at University of Virginia, Of course, I had my GPA and I had my MCAT. But as soon as I walked into my interview, there was a fourth year med student. First thing she told me was, "Oh my God, I cried at your personal statement." So I knew from that moment that the reason I was sitting in my interview wasn't necessarily for my scores, wasn't necessarily for what I've done in my, on my MCAT. It was more, I read your application and I saw someone that I wanted to interview, and I saw someone that I thought could do well at this school. That's why you're sitting at this chair right now, and that's why you're interviewing with us. So, that's a very important part of the application. I'll get more into detail on that in a different video. If you missed the last video, I'll put a link somewhere, and you can click on it, and stay tuned. Give me a like, give me a shout out, give me a subscription. Follow me on Instagram, jmedicine. See you guys soon. Take care. One take, Jersey. One take, Jay.